Oh, wait, this is where Wood Owls.
Shit,
Okay.
how many books? How many pages?
We're on page 5, going strong.
Going strong. Page 5.
They were 5 Cyrodiils. Cyrodiils?
I don't know, we haven't gotten that page.
Cyrodiils, 2 Bretons and a Nord. The group gathered around a campfire of
Cyrodiils?
glowing... What?
Cyrodiils?
Yeah.
Cyrodiils. Cyrodiils.
Cyrodiils.
Cyrodiils,
Alright,
yeah.
I'll give you that one.
Voice
The
acting.
group gathered
in
around a
Skyrim.
campfire of glowing white stones, pulling steaming strips of meat from the
Strips of meat.
cadaver.
Dude.
Yeah,
Jesus.
cadaver. sorry,
Cadaver.
of a great
Cadaver.
stag.
That
At
is not a lore
Scody's
thing.
approach, they rose up,
Scody.
all but the Nord, who was distracted by his hunk of animal flesh. Good evening. Sorry
Classic
to interrupt,
Nord.
but I was wondering if I might have a little something to eat. I'm afraid I'm rather hungry after walking all day with some refugees from Grenos and Athe. They bade him to sit down and eat and introduce themselves. So the war is back on, it seems, said Scody
Scotty.
amiably. Best for these effet? Best for these effet?
Yep.
Effet do nothings,
do nothings.
replied the Nord in between bites. I've never seen such a lazy culture. Now they've got the Khajiiti striking them on land, and the
Khajiiti?
and the
It does
high,
say Khajiiti.
and the high elves at sea. If there's any province that deserves a little distress, it's damnable Valenwood. I don't see how they're so offensive to you, laughed one of the Bretons. They're congenital thieves.
Congenial?
Congenital.
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 They're congenital thieves, even worse than the Khajiiti, because they are so blessed meek in their aggression.
Congenital, present from birth.
What? Anyway, the
Congenital
Nord
means
spat
present
out.
from birth.
Oh, gotcha. The Nord spat out a gob of fat which sizzled on the hot stones of the fire. They spread their forests into territory that doesn't belong to them, slowly infiltrating their neighbors, and they're puzzled when Elsewhere shoves back at them. They're all villains of the worst order. So what are you doing here? Asked Scody.
Scody.
I'm a diplomat from the court of Jenna. Muttered the Nord, returning to his food. What about you? What are you doing here? Asked one of the Cryodils.
Cryodils.
Yeah.
Cyrodiils?
I work for the Lord
Cryodils.
Artuis's building commission in the Imperial City, said
Atreus?
Scody. Yeah, that's probably. One of my former colleagues suggested that I come down to Valenwood. He said the war was over and I could contract a great deal of business for my firm, rebuilding what was lost. One disaster after another, and I've lost all my money. I'm in the middle of the rekindling of
Get
war.
fucked.
and
Get
I
fucked.
cannot
Get
find
fucked.
my former
Get fucked.
colleague. Former colleague, murmured one of the Cryodils, who had introduced himself as
Cryodill.
Regelius.
Regelius.
Cyrodiils,
Regular.
dude.
I was
Cyril-
going in your chat
Cyrodiils.
raging about your cryodills.
I
Dude,
don't know.
Cyrodiil. Jesus.
Yeah. Like, come on.
Cryodils.
Cryodiil. That's all I
Like,
Dude,
Cyrodiils.
that
Cyrodiils references
Cryodil.
people from Cyrodiils.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Specifically.
He wasn't by any chance named
Cryodill.
Leodes Juris, was he?
He wasn't by any chance named Jesus Christ, was he? I'm looking at it right now.
You know him?
No.
He lured me down to Valenwood in nearly the exact same circumstances, smiled Reglius grimly. I worked for your employer's competitor, Lord Venek's men, where Leodes Juris also formerly worked. He wrote to me asking that I represent an Imperial Building Commission and contract some post-war construction. I had just been released from my employment, and I thought that if I brought some new business, I could have my job back. Juris and I met in Athe, and he said he was going to arrange a very lucrative meeting with the Sylvanar. Sylvanar, yeah.
Sure.
Scody was stunned. Where is he now? I'm no theologian, so I couldn't say.
Theologian.
Yeah,
That's how you
theologian.
pronounce it.
Yeah,
That's right.
theologian, someone who studies religion and stuff. No? Fuck.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
Probably in this
Cultures.
context, more like someone who knows more like as much as a god.
Either way, cultured swine. Wrigleyus shrugged. He's dead. When the Khajiiti attacked Athay, they began by torching the harbor where Juris was readying his boat. Or, I should say, my boat, since it was purchased with the gold I brought. By the time we were even aware of what was happening, enough to flee, everything by the water was ash. The GT may be animals, but they know how to arrange an attack. I think they followed us through the jungle to Vindisi, said Scotty.
Vin Diesel, said Scotty.
Nervously. There was definitely a group of something jumping along the treetops. Probably one of the monkey folks, snorted the Nord. Nothing to be concerned about. But when we first came to Vindisi and the Bosmiri all entered that tree, they were furious, whispering something about unleashing an ancient terror on their enemies. The Breton shivered, remembering. They've been there ever since, for over a day and a half now. If you want something to be afraid of, that's the direction to look. The other Breton, who was representative of the Daggerfell Mages Guild, was staring off into the darkness while his fellow provincial spoke. Maybe. There's something in the jungle too. On the edge of the village, looking in. More refugees, maybe? Asked Scotty, trying to keep the alarm out of his voice. Not unless they're traveling through the trees now, whispered the wizard. The Nord and one of the cryodils grabbed a long tarp of wet leather and pulled it across the fire, instantly extinguishing it without so much as a sizzle. Now Scotty could see the intruders, their elliptical yellow eyes and long, cruel blades catching the torchlight. He froze with fear, praying that he too was not so visible to them. Felt something bump against his back and gasped. Reglius's voice hissed from above. Be quiet for Mara's sake and climb up here. Scotty grabbed hold of the knotted double vine that hung down from a tall tree at the edge of the dead campfire. He scrambled up it as quickly as he could, holding his breath lest any grunt of exertion escape him. At the top of the vine, high above the village, was an abandoned nest from some great bird in a trident-shaped branch. As soon as Scotty pulled himself into the soft, fragrant straw, Wrigleyus pulled up a vine. No one else was there, and when Scotty looked down, he could see no one below. No one, that is, except the Khajiiti, slowly moving towards the glow of the temple of the temple tree. I scrolled down and it went to the next page automatically, which was interesting. Thank you, whispered Scotty, deeply touched that a competitor had helped him. He turned away from the village and saw that the tree's upper branches brushed against the mossy rock walls that surrounded the valley below. How are you at climbing? You're mad, said Regulus under his breath. We should stay here until they leave. If they burn Vindisi like they did Athay and Grenos, we'll be dead sure as if we were on the ground. Scotty began the slow, careful climb up the tree, testing each branch. You see what they're doing? Can't really tell, Regulus stared down into the gloom. They're at the front of the temple. I think they also have, looks like long ropes trailing off behind them, off into the pass. Scotty crawled onto the strongest branch that pointed towards the wet, rocky face of the cliff. It was not a far jump at all, so close in fact that he could smell the moisture and feel the coolness of the stone. But it was a jump nevertheless, and in his history as a clerk, he had never before leapt from a tree 100 feet off the ground onto a sheer rock. He pictured in his mind's eye the shadows that had pursued him through the jungle from the heights above, how their legs coiled to springs, how their arms snapped forward in an elegant, fluid motion to grasp. He leapt. His hands grappled for rock, but long, thick cords of moss were more accessible. He held hard, but when he tried to plant his feet forward, they slipped up skyward. For a few seconds, he found himself upside down, before he managed to pull himself into a more conventional position. There was a narrow outcropping jutting out of the cliff where he could stand and finally exhale. Regulus! 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 Scotty did not dare to call out. In a minute, there was a shaking of branches, and Lord Venek's men emerged. First his satchel, then his head, then the rest of him. Scotty started to whisper something, but Regulus shook his head violently and pointed downward. One of the Khajiiti was at the base of the tree, peering at the remains of the campfire. Regulus awkwardly tried to balance himself on the branch, but as strong as it was exceedingly difficult with only one free hand. Scotty Scody cupped his hands. Scody cupped his palms and then pointed at the satchel. It seemed to pain Regulus to let it out of his grasp, but he relented and tossed it to Scody. There was a small, almost invisible hole in the bag. When Scody caught it, a single gold coin dropped out. It rang as it bounced on the rock wall, on the descent in a high, soft sound that seemed like the loudest alarm Scody had ever heard. And many things happened very quickly. The Cathay rot at the base of the tree looked up and gave a loud wail. The other Khajiit followed
And the
in
Dren's gonna
chorus
make the clutch?
as the cat below crouched down and then sprung up into the lower branches. Regulus saw below him, climbing up with impulsive dexterity, and panicked. Even before he jumped, Scody could tell that he was going to fall. With a cry, Regulus, the clerk, plunged to the ground, breaking his neck.
Jesus Christ.
Damn. A flash of white fire erupted from every crevice of the temple, and the moan of the Bosmiri prayer changed into something terrible and otherworldly. The climbing Cathay rat stopped and started. Kirgo.
What a bunch of retards.
Kirgo, it gasped. The wild hunt. It was as if a crack in the reality had opened wide. A flood of horrific beasts, tentacled toads, insects of armor and spine, gelatinous serpents, vaporous beings with the face of gods, all poured forth from the great hollow tree, blind with fury. They tore the Khajiit in the front of the temple to pieces. All the other cats fled for the jungle. The descent to fled for the jungle. But as they did so, they began pulling on the ropes they carried. In a few seconds' time, the entire village of Vendisi was boiling with the lunatic apparitions of the Wild Hunt.
The Wild Hunt.
Over the babbling, barking, howling hordes, Scody heard the Cryodils in hiding, crying out as they were devoured. The Nord too was found and eaten, and both Bretons. The wizard had turned himself invisible, but the swarm did not rely on their sight. The tree Cathay Rot was in began to sway and rock from the impossible violence beneath it. Scody looked at the Khajiiti's fear-struck eyes and held out one of the cords.
We don't know.
Held out one of the cords of moss.
Huh?
The cat's face showed its pitiful gratitude as it leapt for the vine. It didn't have time to entirely replace that expression when Scody pulled back on the cord and watched it fall.
Wow, what an
The
asshole.
hunt consumed it to the bone before it struck
crushed.
the ground.
Damn.
Scody's own jump was up to the next outcropping of rock was immeasurably more successful. From there, he pulled himself to the top of the cliff and was able to look down into the chaos that had been the village of Vendisi. The hunt's mass had grown and began to spill out through the pass out of the valley, pursuing the fleeing Khajiit. It was then that the madness truly began. In the moon's
Oh my
light,
God, we haven't
from
even gotten to the real
Scody's
madness
vantage,
yet.
he could see where the Khajiit had attached their ropes. With a
Oh,
thunderous
dear.
boom, an avalanche of boulders poured over the pass. When the dust cleared, he saw that the valley had been sealed. The wild hunt had nowhere to turn but on itself. Scody turned his head, unable to bear to look at the cannibalistic orgy. The night jungle stood before him, a web of wood. He slung Regulus' satchel over his shoulder and entered. Dun dun dun!
Which chapter is that?
Chapter 4.
Shit. What? We're jumping ahead, dude.
We are.
Now we have to find
That's
chapters
that
1 through 3.
and 5 through whatever. Oh boy.
No.
What's this book called?
A Dance with
thank
Fire,
you
I
all
think.
for joining this book reading with James Rothenberg.
Oh boy. Woo! That got me.
Wow,
Woo. Damn. I'm all
My
sweaty
palms
now.
are sweaty.
I'm all sweaty now.
So, so what can we take from this? Well, the Khajiits and the Wood Elves may not like each other very much, huh?
No kidding.
Wait, what?
on this-
Whoa. Where are you getting that from?
What? Where am I getting that from?
Wait, was Scotty and Bosmiri? I must have missed that.
No, the
Oh,
Wood
wow.
the Khajiits were invading a Wood Elf. It's in
Right, but
Valenwood,
he...
dude.
Well, I mean, they were just there, right? I mean, it's not like.
They were raping the village. I mean, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
They turned a wild hunt to kill all the